Tonight's film, Annie Hall, is, without doubt, Woody Allen's masterpiece. But beyond that, it's difficult to say exactly what kind of film it is. A cousin to romantic comedy, perhaps, but the romance of true romantic comedy is that while the characters may be thinking sex, the film's all foreplay. Annie Hall begins with a touch of the romantic, but then the lovers quickly bop into bed, and romance plus sex equals relationship. The ideal of classic romantic comedies was equality. Man learns as much from woman as woman from man, and together they discover mutual love and compatibility. In this film, Woody Allen's character does all the teaching and learns little or nothing from Diane Keaton's Annie.
I don't know. I mean, some of her poems seem neat.
Neat?
Neat, yeah.
I hate to tell you, this is 1975. You know, the neat went out, I would say, at the turn of the century.
Instead, he studies himself obsessively until he discovers their mutual incompatibility. So it's not romance, nor, while it's a very funny film, is it, strictly speaking, a comedy. In my definition, a true comedy is a film that would be funny without gag lines or pratfalls, because the story itself is one great, elaborate, rolling joke. The biggest belly laughs explode out of the gaps between what a character expects to happen and what actually does. Scene by scene, each time the story twists, we laugh and laugh until by the end we're convulsed on the floor. That's a comedy, a funny story. So, although Annie Hall's a treasure of wit and gags, it's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, gets girl back, loses girl forever story is not comedy.
I don't know why you have to get high every time we make love.
It relaxes me.
Oh, you have to be artificially relaxed before we can go to bed?
Well, what's the difference anyway?
Oh, I'll give you a shot of sodium pentothal. You can sleep through it.
Oh, come on, look.
Annie Hall is a film of the 70s, a time when the separation between sex and commitment was growing greater and greater, and both were drifting further and further away from marriage. So Woody Allen tossed all three in the air and created, for want of a better term, the nervous romance, progenitor of films such as Starting Over, Tootsie, When Harry Met Sally, evolving in the 90s into the paranoid romance, Sea of Love, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct. But this work is more than a neurotic look at relationships. It's self-analysis turned self-inquisition. Annie Hall is the modern version of that ancient form known as the confession, from St. Augustine to Rousseau to the stand-up comic. For indeed, confession is the natural mode of stand-up. Oh, I had a terrible childhood. To punish me, my mother would, and on goes the comic, from joke to painful revelation to joke again. Woody Allen was a brilliant stand-up. First-person confession is second nature to him. And Annie Hall is simply a stand-up routine writ large. Look how it begins.
Annie and I broke up, and I still can't get my mind around that. You know, I keep sifting the pieces of the relationship through my mind and examining my life and trying to figure out where did the screw-up come, you know? And a year ago we were...
So the confession begins. But Allen is careful to keep the relationship between himself and his persona ambiguous. Exactly how much of this film is Woody Allen and how much his fictional mask, Elvie Singer, we'll never know. Now, when I say confession, I don't mean he's going to honestly and openly pour his heart out. No, he's going to rationalize, blame, excuse, and charm his way around the hardest truths.
He kissed me!
That's the second time this month. Step up here.
What did I do?
Step up here.
Why? I was just expressing a healthy sexual curiosity.
60-year-old boys don't have girls on their minds.
I did.
For God's sake, Alvy, even Freud speaks of a latency period.
Well, I never had a latency period. I can't help it.
This confession, then, motivates the film's zigzag pattern of storytelling, a mix of pseudo-documentary, so-called realism, fantasy, cartoon, split screen, subjectivities and free associations of all kinds, held together by a mind questing for an answer.
I have to ask you a question. Don't go any further. With your wife in bed, does she need some kind of artificial stimulation like marijuana?
We use a large vibrating egg.
And what is it he's confessing? Well, first, that he's obsessed with sex. But what's the crime in that? Sexual energy has been the inspiration of comedy since Aristophanes. In fact, so there'd be no misunderstanding about that, Greek comics wore a phallus down to their knees. By Shakespeare's day, it shrunk to a codpiece. With Victorian repression, The comic phallus had to be sublimated into Chaplin's cane, Hardy's necktie, Groucho's cigar, Bugs Bunny's carrot, Woody Allen's glasses, all surrogate penises from Freud's catalog of dream symbols. Now, the comic's upbringing tells him that lovemaking must be sensitive, moralistic, a sacred union. But his sexual urgencies tell him something else as he looks around the 70s and finds the erotic trivialized into the athletic. Sex anytime, anywhere, with anyone. A game to be won or lost.
Was it my imagination, or you're just going through the motions?
Alvy, do you remember where I put my drawing pad? Because while you two are doing that, I think I'm going to do some drawing.
You see, that's what I call removed.
But when the boy invites the girl to play the game, he's accused of hitting on her. For the 70s was also the age of the new woman. It was post-60s feminism that put the nervousness in nervous comedies.
And I told her about how I didn't think you'd ever really take me seriously because you don't think that I'm smart enough.
Why do you always bring that up? Oh, because I encourage you to take adult education courses? I think it's a wonderful thing. You meet wonderful, interesting professors. Adult education is such junk. The professors are so phony. How can you do it?
Woody's relentless wit becomes a bitter act of confession to terrible fears of sexual deficiency and impotence, of physical inferiority to other men, of the overwhelming inferiority to women. In short, he fears for his manhood. He's terrified he's being feminized.
Sex with you is really a Kafkaesque experience.
Oh, thank you.
I mean that as a compliment.
I think there's too much burden placed on the orgasm, you know, to make up for empty areas in life.
But the confession goes even deeper. Woody Allen loves to ridicule yuppie culture of narcissism, but he's an arch narcissist himself and knows it. Why does he fall in love with Annie? Because he sees in her aspects of his own personality, the tweedy yet eccentric dress, for example. Then worse, he sets about turning her into a female version of himself, non-sensual yet sexy, and anti-intellectual intellectual.
All right, so what do you want to do?
I don't know now. You want to go to another movie? So let's go see The Sorrow and the Pity.
Oh, come on, we've seen it. I'm not in the mood to see a 4-hour documentary on Nazis.
Well, I'm sorry. I can't. I've got to see a picture exactly from the start to the finish, because I'm anal.
That's a polite word for what you are.
For all its seeming modernity, the film is thick with nostalgia, as Allen tries to rework the new woman back to the traditional. Yet, in that famous irony of Pygmalion, the artist's creation takes on a life of its own and abandons the artist. But no great loss, it seems to me, for despite the title of the film, the real subject is Woody Allen's fascination with himself.
What's the difference? It's all mental masturbation.
Oh, well, now we're finally getting to a subject you know something about.
Hey, don't knock masturbation. It's sex with someone I love.
And that leads to his final and most painful secret. Woody consciously analyzes his unconscious mind, then dramatizes his unconscious in jokes about impotence, homosexuality, transvestism, and so on. The secret, I believe, is in the film's opening joke.
And it goes like this, I'm paraphrasing. I would never want to belong to any club that would have someone like me for a member.
In other words, Woody would not want to be with any woman who would want to be with him because she would have to be a blind fool not to see that he's a pretender, a man who cannot love. The film was originally titled not Annie Hall, but Anhedonia, the Greek word for the inability to experience the joy that love brings. That's a terrible confession, the inability to love, when the capacity to love is the final and absolute definition of one's humanity. But maybe Woody's a bit hard on himself. This wonderful film alone is an act of love. He was once asked if he could have one wish, what would he want? And he said, to be someone else. Who he is the preeminent film comic of the last generation. Like Chaplin, he's created a persona, the Allen-esque figure filled with arrogance and anxiety, hedonism and guilt, confidence and fear, the frightened face of the modern soul struggling to survive. But unlike Chaplin, Allen is not afraid to take a step toward the darkness, and we love him for that, because here at the end of the millennium, he's become the model of our nervous reconciliations to the content and discontent of our time.